So I have said before that I'm always delighted to discover that I'm wrong. When I find out that I've been wrong about something, it means I'm learning. So I may be wrong about what I'm about to say in opening up this video. My honest opinion is that nobody is a linguistic genius. And what do I mean by this? I think it is a proven fact there are some human beings who are born with an extraordinary innate ability in mathematics that is not the result of education, that they start off before receiving mathematical education with a very, very high level of ability to do computations, including geometric computations, what have you. And this is sometimes shown with children, sometimes shown with so-called idiot savants, people with no formal education, that this has been demonstrated time and time again. But, and I think it's an easy thing for people to imagine there's a parallel in languages, perhaps because we feel that some of us have extraordinary difficulty in learning languages, that there are a lot of people out there who are extraordinarily gifted, that there's kind of a separate class of humanity parallel to math geniuses that are linguistic geniuses. My honest opinion is that this does not exist. Every case I've encountered where, say, one person described another as linguistic genius, and I then met the person face-to-face and talked to them, or even when this was said to me, and I then looked at their written work, their publications, or their YouTube channel. Now with the internet, these kinds of illusions are easier and easier to deflate. What I found was if you just read their own description of how much they studied for how many years with what methods, because these people very often want to document exactly how they learn languages, that there's really no genius there. Obviously, using exactly the same methods, one person is going to get 10% better results than another, 20%, maybe even 50%. And that may be partly due to the fact that the methods are not good for the particular person. It'll partly due to, the level of motivation, what have you. But when you think about what's really involved in language learning, I feel pretty confident at this stage of my life, after having studied so many different languages, from not just different languages, but different languages from different language families, having studied most of them as an autodidact, some with classroom methods, learning written language, so on and so forth, for pretty much all of them, doing a lot of language research, a lot of language learning, and a lot of language teaching. I feel pretty confident that there really are no shortcuts, neither in terms of the work you're doing on paper, in front of your eyes, outside of your body, nor in terms of the internal component of it, the mirror of the mind of what you're doing in your mind. Like if you just think about vocabulary acquisition. Vocabulary acquisition is not like balancing a complex equation. It's not like looking at algebra, arithmetic, trigonometry. There's really a challenge for most of us looking at a complex equation and understanding what's going on there. I completely understand how another person may be able to intuitively grasp and make use of that information much more rapidly than I can. In terms of the kind of progress you have to make in complex geometry, what have you, there's a mode of thinking there that is in no way comparable to the challenge I had when I was learning Korean Ojibwe, and I had to memorize the names of the months. There are 12 months. Memorize the names of the months. Memorize the names of the season. Learn how to make a sentence. It's too hot outside. It's too cold outside. Whatever your methods are. The kind of information your brain is having to acquire there, which is something any imbecile can do. Of course, small children learn language. You learn language when you're only 2 years old and you're very mentally simple. But also people who have really severe mental disabilities and brain injuries can learn new languages too. It's not really so much about higher abstract reasoning or what have you, but there is a process, there is a matter of doing the work to learn new vocabulary and then practice using that vocabulary in different contexts, of course, trying to make sentences, trying to make yourself understood, et cetera, et cetera. But I don't see any shortcuts there. Now, okay, my girlfriend can jump in any time, but this is really my issue, not her issue. She just started learning Chinese, and before that, she's not someone who has a ton of experience with learning languages.
I thought it was amazing when we met somebody from Spain, and he was like, yeah, it's normal for people in Europe to know 3-4 languages, because where I'm from in America, people know one language and maybe a little bit of another language.
Right.
So, yeah.
This is true, but the people in Europe he's talking about, they normally know maybe 4 languages that are very closely related. So if you know Spanish and French and English, these are cognate languages. So the word elevator is going to be almost identical in all of them. Or maybe they also know Italian. You know what I mean? I remember when we were in Italy, I was going through the dictionary, and it just blew my mind, especially when you got into technical language, different types of medical tests, medicines, related to things like computers, elevators, technology. Just this huge amount of vocabulary was either identical to English or had one or two vowels different, slightly different spelling. So the extent to which those languages are cognate has to be taken into consideration. I've experienced learning English, I've experienced learning Chinese, I've experienced learning Japanese, completely separate language families, not just languages. I've experienced working on Sri Lankan Pali in the Sinhalese tradition, Pali in Myanmar, Laos, Thailand, Cambodia, and then the modern languages. So Cambodian is a member of a totally different language family from Thai, even though they're next door. One is Mon Khmer, one is Thai Kadai, Laotian, etc. And then in North America, as I already mentioned, Ojibwe and Cree. So when you have that kind of profoundly alien language gap, the word for elevator in Chinese has no resemblance to the word for elevator in English. Nothing. Even French, le ciel. So the name of this channel, à-bas-le-ciel, right? And in English we have ceiling. It is actually the same etymology. They are cognate. There are links even when they're not completely obvious. So that is true. There are many people in Western Europe who at least pick up a smattering of several languages, but where they are closely related, and that can mask what the real challenges are in learning a new language. Now, when I have seen people celebrated on the internet as linguistic geniuses, I've looked into a couple of them, what I find is all they've done is acquire phrasebook knowledge of a language through repetition. So phrasebook knowledge is something very specific. You're not studying etymology, you're not studying the components of words, you're probably not studying grammar, you're probably not learning reading or writing ability. Because if you learn whole phrases, a lot of people hype that learning whole phrases is the way. But if you learn only whole phrases, then your ability to read in the target language is very, very limited because you're recognizing whole phrases, not individual words. So you need it all, right? You need to learn words, word components, and phrases. You need to do it all. You can't just do phrases. And there are people right now selling a language education package saying learn a language in 6 months. So that's exactly their point. So I find there are people who have just memorized phrases from phrasebooks, and they've drilled them again and again and they know enough about linguistics that their phonetics are accurate. Phonologically, they are saying the words correctly. So it's possible for them, after only studying Cambodian for 3 months, to walk up to a Cambodian person in the street and say 2 phrases that sound pretty accurate. Yeah.
Even if they could say it, I don't think that they could succeed in a conversation because you never know what somebody's going to say in response. I've had that happen to me with Chinese. Like I'll just go to the bun shop and be like, "Do you have these buns?" And I'm either expecting yes or no, but other than that, I'm like,
right,
we're moving by.
right. Maybe they say some well, we don't have any yet, but maybe if you come back at 6 o'clock, they say something. Right. Well, and in terms of listening comprehension, you never get to level 1 through phrasebook knowledge of a language, because level 1 really has to deal with scanning the language you're hearing, breaking it down into units of meaning, which in most cases is words. It's not in all language. Like in Cree and Ojibwe, it's a little bit different than it is in Chinese. I mean, no surprise there. But even in Japanese, it's totally different from it is in Chinese. Yeah. When listening, what are the word boundaries you're listening for? Because, even in English, the word English is an example. It starts with ing, and that can sound like the ending of a verb before it, right? So the ing sound, is that part of the end of one word or part of the start of the next word? Now, of course, in a language we're native speakers in, we're not even aware that our minds are doing that. When you start studying a totally alien language, whether it's Chinese or Ojibwe or something, that's a real process where somebody says something to you in Chinese and it just sounds like blah, 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 blah. And you're breaking it into distinct units of meaning, which maybe individual words may not
every
be.
Language, but in Chinese, it's especially. It seems like it would be especially difficult because it's a monosyllabic language. Like a lot of words are just one syllable. Many are.
Yes. And you see, Thai is an interesting intermediate position because Thai has all this Buddhist influence. We were looking today earlier at that video I did at a railway station here in China. So in the Thai language and in Laotian also. So train station is Satani Lot Phai. There's a lot there to work with. You're not going to miss it. You know what I mean? And Chinese, maybe you're going to get Ho Che Jan. Maybe you're just going to get Jan. Like maybe that's it. And Jan, by the way, it's written in Pinyin with a ZH. So depending on where you are, who you're talking to, it could be pronounced like a J sound, the consonant. It could be more like a Z sound. Like there's a lot of idiolect and dialect variation, even with that one syllable. So, station is just one syllable in Chinese. That's all you got to work with. Yeah. So the scanning and listening part of it. But my fundamental feeling about language, I am actually a bit of a, I guess you'd say, a biological nihilist when it comes to language. There's a lot of mythology about language. There's a lot of people make up these stories. Oh, well, children are natural linguistic geniuses. You can learn so much between age 0 and age 6. Mm-hmm. No. When kids get to age 6, they speak English like a lisping 6-year-old. They struggle to make sentences. They struggle to form complex thoughts. It is not easy for 6-year-olds to speak even their first language. It's really not. You may not have a clear enough memory of your own childhood, how hard it was to be convincing, how hard it was to present complex thoughts as a 6-year-old. They don't learn that much in 6 years. And if you go now and study Chinese for 6 years, at the end of that process, you don't want to speak like a Chinese 6-year-old either. You know what I mean? You don't. So, there's a lot of mythology that way. I look at human language as something, in terms of evolution, it's partly just an accident created by breastfeeding. The actual cavity in our mouth that we use to form these complex sounds is a cavity created by the fact of breastfeeding. The fact that we can use our lips in this manner, which, for example, a reptile can't do to make these complex sounds. Reptiles can make noises down in their throat, but they can't make like the ooh and these other complex noises. The use of the roof of our mouth, that cavity, the shape of our lips, and so on, which even a very different animal like a wolf, they have that because wolves also breastfeed. And these lizards I'm talking about don't, you know what I'm saying? Monitor lizards don't have this kind of complex vocalization ability and so on.
Yeah, it's funny because I learned about how speech works, but I didn't really learn about it in a biological way. So in an evolutionary biological way. So yeah, like I took a class on like speech production and how it actually works anatomically, but I had not thought about that before. Like, why?
Why? Yeah, why did we evolve this? Yeah. Why did we evolve something beyond the ability to scream for help, or what many animals in the wild have? They can give a few different signals, but why do we have this really refined and complex set of speech organs? It's actually related to breastfeeding anatomically. So it's a bit of an accident of nature that way. But then beyond that, of course, we mostly talk about the origins and purpose of language in very culturally laden ways. But let's just say, in a sense, I advocate for bilingualism. My own daughter is growing up at least bilingual, if not speaking 3 or 4 languages. But she has 2 core languages she's learning in parallel, English and French, and she wants to study Chinese, and she's trying to learn Chinese, and she's evidently getting some influence from yet some other languages in Europe, we won't mention her. But, because she was learning German until recently too, right? So it was 3 languages already, plus Chinese. But anyway, I do think there really is a level on which we should is the wrong word. We would learn language just through mimicry and just one language and carry that around with us our whole lives. And it is really something unnatural we're pushing ourselves into when we try to learn a whole parallel set of vocabulary in a foreign language system. It's not something that comes to us easily or something that comes to us naturally. And I think it's actually debatable whether or not math comes to us naturally or whether or not math comes to some of us naturally. You know what I mean? There may be an innate instinct or a whole complex group of innate instincts involved in abstract geometry and trigonometry and calculus and algebra. There may be, you know what I mean? But I think definitely you have to have the kind of all due humility to say, well, biologically, we have a certain capacity just by, during this period of breastfeeding and being dependent on our parents, which lasts a lot longer for us than most other mammals, we hang around the adults and we pick up their language through mimicry, and then we carry that capacity with us, But there's definitely something unnatural sitting down with a deck of cue cards and at age 39 or something, starting on a whole new language and trying to activate that infantile part of your brain, trying to stimulate that and be motivated and focused and get those results. Now, of course, you can. I'm living proof. You can learn a whole bunch of languages. But, I guess what's so beguiling with the idea of linguistic genius, and some people have said it about me. I've met people who said that I was a linguistic genius, and I normally sat down with them and just talked through how many hours per day and with what methods, how I learned the languages, whatever it was they're impressed with, whether it was Pali or what have you. So, like Pali as an example, Most people who learn Pali do not learn vocabulary. Pali is a language like ancient Greek, where or Latin or what have you, where most people learn it in a very artificial classroom chalkboard way. And I've pointed out to people, look, the reason why you perceive me as a linguistic genius, what I'm doing here is not that hard, it's not that sophisticated. I just actually memorized thousands of words of vocabulary, which is what you would do for French or Spanish or any modern language, any normal language people study. It's just most people who work on the language don't. They just learn some rules of grammar and kind of scrape by without learning vocabulary. So there are different things people perceive as genius contextually. And I mean, let's be honest about how easy it is to misperceive that. We met my mom. My mom had not seen me in 15 years. We met my mom. The last time my mom met me, I probably spoke like one language. I don't even know. I'd started studying, I guess I'd started studying Cambodian, but the last time my mom met me, my whole life was so different. I'd started studying some languages, And now my mom meets me, and I seemingly speak totally fluent Chinese with the waitress, right? Now, in reality, what did I say to the waitress? There was a little bit of, I had to explain, no, she wants 2 cups of tea. My mom wanted 2 cups of tea, not 1. She wants English-style tea, not Chinese-style tea. So there was a little bit of chatter back and forth with the waitress. And the waitress could understand everything I said in Chinese. I could understand everything the waitress said. But, I mean, this is not remotely, this is not an impressive use of language when you really think about it. But my mom has no ability to scrutinize that. She's just like, wow, she's seen me for the first time in 15 years, and I'm able to speak Chinese. I apparently learned Chinese in just 7 months, right? Which there's some truth to. My Chinese handwriting looks very impressive, especially if the person looking at it doesn't know anything about Chinese, right? And I mean, just now I've been writing in Laotian. My Laotian handwriting looks amazing, which is a shock to me too. I haven't read or written that language for 10 or 11 years, and I'm able to write this language, and it looks fantastic. But again, what does it really mean? So it's really easy for an outside observer to massively overestimate your accomplishments in a language, especially if your method of praxis is to just rehearse phrasebook. Because phrasebook usage, it's a whole phrase. It makes sense to the native speaker you're talking to and so on. But phrasebook memorization, it won't even give you reading comprehension. And it won't lead you into advanced listening comprehension, which is the hardest thing to buy, because in university level courses you don't really work on listening comprehension enough and so on. So yeah.
Yeah, no, just from the people that I knew in college, those who were more advanced in German, I was learning German.
Sure.
It was pretty obvious to me that they just spent more time studying it, and that's why they had done, or they had traveled to Germany and stayed there for an extended period of time.
There's a famous scientific study. I mean, you guys may know this now that I describe it. It was quoted in a famous book. It got more famous the more it was quoted. I don't really even know if I believe this, but there was a famous study that claimed there's no such thing as musical genius. And it claimed this by they actually studied and tracked the number of hours different music students used to rehearse. And their thesis was, no, what's being perceived as musical genius is actually just the musicians who are doing 20 hours of rehearsal more per week. We're putting in tons of time and effort. And that's being perceived as innate genius. And the other students, where they track them through the same educational program, they're doing less than half as much prep and rehearsal. And they're not being perceived as genius. So that's an interesting fact. But I'm skeptical. But I think there is an argument that musical genius exists. Okay, go on.
So in the same way that your ability to learn languages is helped by your memory, you have a good memory, and also by your drawing ability for these languages.
Yeah.
You're artistic. You have an artistic mind. In that same way, I think people are. I think there are many things that can help people improve their musical ability. A lot of people just have terrible pitch. They cannot...
Right.
A lot of people are tone deaf.
Right.
Tone deaf.
There's a form of listening comprehension involved in music in that sense, right?
And some people don't have rhythm.
Right. Right.
So to a certain extent, to a certain extent, there are qualities that can make you more of a musical genius.
But including also just passion and verve and tenacity and wanting it wanting it more, what motivates you. I mean, I learned a lot of, I learned a lot of Chinese in 7 months, but I'm also honest with the people that I wasn't highly motivated. I didn't want to learn Chinese. I mean, I'm not going to get into the whole autobiography it was, but actually I was dragging my feet. I wasn't trying my hardest at Chinese, whereas I did have the experience of really trying my hardest at some other languages I studied, where I was giving it 110%. And I know how different that feels and if the results are. But if I just stick with vocabulary, and vocabulary really is the core of learning a new language. There's no escaping it. Most people, most academics are very motivated to study and teach grammar because grammar is finite, grammar is intellectually sophisticated, and grammar is something that's suited to the lecture format in university. You can stand in front of a chalkboard, give an intelligent presentation of grammar, but vocabulary is way more important. The problem is vocabulary is infinite, it's frustrating, it's a lot, I don't think there is any shortcut for vocabulary memorization, vocabulary drill. And, even with vocabulary, there are the 4 elements: listening comprehension, speaking speaking ability, and, reading and writing and so on. And then learning how it's used in a sentence and how it isn't. For every language, just that core function of the human mind, which we all do as infants. And, you can do more effectively as an adult to some extent. That core issue of vocabulary acquisition, I don't think there is any genius for it. I don't think there is any shortcut. And I said this about baking recently. I don't think anyone's really interested in whether or not nobody's really interested in your ideas, your theory of baking. They're interested in whether or not you bake. You know what I mean? They're interested in whether or not you've made a good cake or a good bread and they can buy it or whatever. You know what I mean? It's all about execution. There's very little. I mean, language is also one of those things. I like to philosophize about it. I enjoy kind of philosophy of language. But the bulk of the task ahead of you, it really is just a question of whether or not you do that work. And if you can find sources that are honest, including autobiographies, like autobiographies of great men, of highly accomplished people, that really break down for you how they learned a language, how they studied it honestly, I think you're going to find that even the people who are perceived as linguistic geniuses, actually they deal with exactly the same stumbling blocks, exactly the same uphill struggle, and they get approximately the same outcomes for the same methods, maybe 10% change, maybe 20% difference. But maybe this is a great equalizer, among humanity, and maybe we overlook that fact because of some unique conditions like dyslexia and how that clouds our thinking about what language acquisition is and what it consists of. That's all I got to say.